So welcome everybody, I'm really glad you're here. So my name is Steve Lett, and I live in Marin, and I am a health researcher. I spend a lot of time looking at health products and trying to figure out which ones I think are kind of the best in their category. And the ones that I really like, I usually get involved with the companies that wrap or distribute those products. So that's one of the things I do, and I have some really good products, and I can almost guarantee you that you'd probably be interested in some of them. You could talk to me some other time about that. But one of them is this light therapy. And I've known about this for many, many years. They've been doing this for 20 years now, and I think this is the third version? Third version. And this new version they've been using with neurological problems with some really, really interesting results. And I actually went to a conference a year ago. One of the main reasons was I wanted to meet them and spend some time with them, and so I became kind of hooked, and so I'm a rep for the company, and I want to start to see this get out in the Bay Area more, because right now Dr. Saputo, Len, is the only one really doing this in the Bay Area. And he's got patients over here in Marin, and they would rather go to somebody here. So we'd like to see that happen. So this is an evening to get to know about the technology and some of the clinical results with it and that kind of thing. And a week from tomorrow, the 27th, on a Saturday, they're going to be doing free demos for doctors, patients, family members who have an issue that they'd like to work on. There'll be half-an-hour sessions. We're going to do 2 every half an hour. So I have a sign-up sheet over there. You can see me, and through the week too, you can contact me, and I'll schedule you in. It's going to be at the Preventive Medical Center in Marin, Dr. Elson Haas's clinic up in Santa Fe. So you've got a packet of information, and also you have the speakers' bios there, so I'm not going to go into detail about that. I wanted to mention one article in there that I put in there about the opioid crisis in the construction industry. I just thought it'd be an interesting thing because, according to this, construction workers are nearly 6 times more likely than other industries to develop an opioid addiction. And in Massachusetts, 25% of all opioid overdose deaths were from construction. So here's a field, an industry that could really use all of your help, and could also, use the Firefly along with it. So I just put that in there as a kind of something to consider. Maybe you can, tap into the people who need it there. So, I'm not going to really going to talk too much about the presenters. They can tell a little about themselves, but you have a little bio in there about it. But we have Martin Bales, who's the president of Bales Photonics, and Maurice Bales, who is the inventor of this technology, and Dr. Len Saputo has a clinic over in Walnut Creek, and he's been using this technology for 20 years. He's a big supporter of it. He's not financially involved with the company, but he's been using the technology and has a lot of experience with it, so he'll be talking about that too. So, Martin?
Thank you. So thank you to Steve. I'm not going to talk a lot about myself, but my name is Martin Bales, and I am an acupuncturist. I don't live in Marin. Okay, so a couple disclosures first. I do own Bales Photonics Incorporated, which does sell the Firefly, and I wanted to make a note that the case studies, which I'm going to be presenting later in the presentation, were provided by various healthcare providers using the Firefly, and basically an accumulation of the past 20 years. So not using our biophoton, which is the previous light therapy device, and using the photonic stimulator. So it's not all just from the Firefly. Same concept, but we've just come a long way with output powers and multispectral and frequency generation. Okay, so I've been working with my dad, Maurice Bales, since I was 4. He invented the digital infrared camera in 1979. He's going to talk a little bit more about the history, but that is a thermographic image from 1983. That's me. You can see that The turtlenecks were in that year, I suppose. I actually went to University of Virginia for electrical engineering degree and systems engineering, and then went on to do the master's and doctorate of acupuncture, and actually started a PhD. But my parents said that's enough, so I didn't. It was a PhD over in China, and it would require me to be in China. And my boss said that's enough. So yeah, so that's many degrees. I'm also a full-time practitioner. I direct pain management at a clinic called Center for New Medicine in Irvine. It's the largest private clinic in North America. It's 28,000 square feet, and we treat everything from colds to cancer. My boss is Leanne Keneally. She's been in a lot of documentaries, one of which I was into called The Truth About Cancer, so that's my latest clinic. That was a while ago. I'll go through these and I'll have Brace come up here. He did invent the digital infrared camera in 1979. It wasn't used to help people, it was used to possibly hurt people because it was used for missile detection. So it was to analyze circuit boards for missiles, our Patriot missiles, and that was around Iraq War back at that time. Later, it came into medicine in the 80s. Over 20 years ago, he invented the first FDA-approved light device, and that was called the photonic simulator. And I'll show you the differences between that and the current device on another slide. In 2015, I drug him out of retirement in my mother's hair and put him back into the workforce at his house. And so the first line was the biophoton. That was in 2015. That was the predecessor to the Firefly device we have here. And we'll go over some of the other models that we have. So now I'd like to call him up, talk a little bit more about this.
Hello. Steve told me that that a lot of people are always interested in why that I did what I did, why I invented, and what I did, and why I kept going with the new additions. And first of all, the thing about light therapy, I'm just going to start out with is that it improves function. And we learned that a long time ago by using the infrared camera as a feedback device when we used the photon. You could see the image change, and it was, we thought at the beginning that it was a lot like a nerve block. I had a medical director that was a neurologist, had a neuroscience center. And so we started going to all these neurology meetings, and we could really do a good job treating the nerves, the sympathetics, and the immune system, seeing the difference with all kinds of things. But one thing about this therapy that we discovered right away, even though my beginning device was only put out 250 milliwatts, is that if you were going to help somebody, it usually was right away. I mean, maybe it would take half an hour treatment or something, as you could see. It affected the person right away. It wasn't like you had to wait 2 weeks or something to find out, or a month or something. It was right away. And so that was a little puzzling, because people say, well, why do you have something that happens right away? What's going on? And so I had a couple of experiences these are with the doctors that purchased my equipment. I used to go and give talks with them and help them. And one day, this lady came in that had breast cancer, and her husband worked at one of the national labs, and they were just developing radiation for treating cancer, and he had his wife go in there, and they made a mistake, and they used over 100 times the radiation than they were supposed to. And I don't know if the machine malfunctioned or they set it wrong or what happened, but she ended up with her breasts sores that were just oozing all the time, and then her lymph system probably wasn't working right, and so she had terrible arm and breast pain all the time, 24/7. So anyway, we imaged her and treated her, and I had made, this is actually before I had a commercial model, so I had made 2 prototypes for this doctor to test, and I had one, I'd made 2 of them anyway. So we treated this lady, and the oozing stopped for the first time since she had this problem. It's like she had probably 5 years or something. And then all her pain went away. But then the next day the pain would come back. Then the oozing would come back. But if she used the photon, then she could have more of a normal life. So I told her husband, he was a physicist, and so I said, well, I'll loan you this for a couple of weeks and see if it works. So a couple of weeks went by, and I called him up and said, well, I need the unit back. I just have 2 of them. And he says, no. And I said, well, what do you mean no? And he said, I'm not going to give it back. He said, you can come after me, you can do anything you want, but I'm not giving it back. It's the only thing that helps my life, so I'm keeping it. And so I said, okay, I mean, what am I supposed to say, So, then, maybe a year later, sort of the same thing happened, only with an ALS patient. And the fellow was totally, the only thing he could move was his eyes. And his family brought him in, and so we imaged him and treated him, and he could move his leg out of the wheelchair, right after we treated him. So again, what's going on, Okay, now I always regress. Okay, so back when I was doing, I was at UC Berkeley for a long time in the fusion research. I had a grant from NASA, and we were studying surface science, and they had this thing, an OJ analyzer, which is a spectral analysis using electrons instead of ions. And anyway, this OJ analyzer, what they did is they bombarded this sample in an ultra-high vacuum system with electrons, and then it would knock other electrons out of these different materials, and then you used a cylindrical mirror with different voltages on it to separate the energy of the electrons, and then you could tell what material it was. So you could ion mill away, and you could go through a sample, and you could tell all the different elements in monolayers. And anyway, so working there and learning about how this OJ analyzer worked. And then at the university we used infrared, microwave, everything to try to heat up the fusion plasma. So what happens is, and then in semiconductors, they sort of work the same way, where you have different energies, and you have a valence band and a conduction band, and then if you put energy in, you get a conduction. That's how a transistor works. Well, what I discovered, knowing all of that, because I'm an electronics person, is that when we started treating people, that it was like the same. It was the same model, with the nerves. So if somebody had scarring on the myelinated sheath of the nerve, and you treated the person, it's photons. Photons are pure energy with no mass. So it was like I think the reason the nerve is working is because it has scarring on the myelinated sheath, but we're putting in energy, and then it gives it enough energy that the electron pulse can go over that scarring, and then the nerve works, and that's why it works right away. So anyway, I came to that conclusion, and that sort of helped me then try to decide what to, what to do next, because we just started with infrared. Then I really thought about this, and I thought, all the tissues, if you think about the electrons, and if you think about the photons adding energy to all the tissue, all these things are alive, and we get our energy from the sun, and our whole bodies are like that, and everything has different wavelengths because they're different colors. Like your blood is a different color. So I thought, why not make an array that's multispectral that has different wavelengths? And you could actually then, if you have like three different blue wavelengths, and you mix them together, you don't want to just have three. You got the whole spectrum, and you can do the same thing with the red. You can do the same thing with the infrared, and then any part of your body that needs that energy that has its own wavelength actually creates light inside the body. Okay, so if I turn on the blue light in a dark room and put it up next to the skin, you can see that the skin actually turns red. I mean, the body fluoresces red with blue light. And the blue light, see, has more energy than infrared. The shorter the wavelength, the more energy. So then what it does, it either upregulates or downregulates all the cells in your body, and then they have the energy, and then the function comes back because the energy works and everything starts working. So that's how it works. So what happened, we were really happy with the multispectral system, and I can show you later. If I turn on that blue and put it in my mouth, all my teeth will fluoresce kind of a magenta color, except the dead ones that have roots, where they root canal, and those will just be white, and all the rest of them will be glowing, just bright pinkish, So, the connective tissue, the bones, the eyes, everything has its own wavelength, and so when you can put in the right energy, then everything works better, right? But then what happened is somebody that was very close to me ended up getting cancer. And, well, before that, anyway, all these people were talking about frequency and microcurrent and all these frequencies and stuff. And so I tried these, and I didn't think they worked any better than the light did. I mean, there was no proof at all that they did anything. And so I was really disappointed in that. And they were all low frequencies, And I thought, this is really strange because, if you look at your DNA and all the building blocks of life and you unwrap it, you're talking about quantum mechanics here. You're talking about things that are really small, submicron stuff. Well, 10 kilohertz is not going to do anything to some submicron something. I mean, it's megahertz, gigahertz. It's way up there. So if you're going to use frequencies to talk to pathogens, then you're going to have high frequencies. So anyway, I knew that a lot of the cancers are caused by viruses, and I thought, well, if I'm going to help this person, didn't want to have radiation, didn't want to have chemotherapy, just wanted to get rid of the cancer. And it was metastasized cancer too, but it was in the lymph nodes. So anyway, I decided I'm going to make a system, and I knew that if you just use one frequency at a time, that it would take 24 hours or something just to do a scan, just long enough to get rid of something with resonance. So I knew I had to use millions of frequencies simultaneously of a resonance of a pathogen to get rid of it.
So that's what I did, and I made that so that I could put it in the light. So now the light is the delivery system for all of those frequencies, and all the different wavelengths penetrate different, but as Dr. Saputo pointed out, Saputo said, well, the blue light doesn't penetrate. Well, it does, but it doesn't penetrate like you think it does. It penetrates because it adds energy to the nerve, and then you get this resonance, and then so it ends up doing the same thing that something else, that other energy would do, even though it's on the skin, or a few millimeters in it. So anyway, that's how all this came about. We were able to, with Martin's help and Dr. Saputo's help, get rid of the cancer totally, without any chemotherapy or radiation. So, let's see what else we have here. So now we use the infrared camera, and we invented the big camera. This is the little one, and this is much smaller, but you can use this one along with the photon as a feedback device to see what you're doing. So if you have a nerve in the back, radiculopathy, pressure on the nerve, and when you look at it with the infrared camera, you can actually see the heat from the nerve with the camera image, and then you can take the wand and move the wand on the nerve distribution, and the heat will go right out of the nerve, and it'll help the patient, get rid of the sciatica or whatever. But we really didn't have anything to know how to program the pathogen. So people had been using galvanic skin resistance for a long time. And did a lot of work. Holter Clark did a lot of work testing all this stuff and the frequencies and everything. And I found this F-scan unit that this comes from Europe, and it's really neat. If you can program it for whatever frequencies you want to scan, and then it measures the skin resistance change that your sympathetic nervous system responds to for each frequency, and then it plots it vertically like a spectrum analyzer. Then you can take the mouse and just see what the frequency is. Then I can take that, program it into our system, and then we can treat the patient or a person for even like just 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then you can scan them again and see if you got the peak. But Dr. Saputo and I and Martin have talked about it a lot, because none of us really believe that it's directly going after any pathogen, because the pathogen really, little tiny pathogen, how's that going to change the skin resistance? Really, it's a sympathetic nervous system that's doing that. So we believe, we do. We believe that we're actually talking to the sympathetic nervous system, and somehow we're helping the sympathetic nervous system take care of the microbiome peak that's out of balance. Okay? So that's it. I guess we have to ask questions later.
Thank you. He could go on for hours. There's been a lot of developments in this time. So I was going to talk just a little bit about the closer. There we go. Better.
Yeah.
There we go. We're using a high-intensity LED chip, as Maurice alluded to, that we had custom. We designed and had custom manufactured for us. So this is not a laser, but it's putting out the power of a class 4 laser. It's actually putting out, for those familiar with milliwatts, it's putting out 37,000 milliwatts, 37 watts of continuous output power. And that is the sum of, if you want to run it full bore, you don't have to run it. That's the sum of the red, the blue, and the near infrared. So that's one thing that really sets us apart just from the lasers. Most of the lasers are just red or since all of them are just red, or just infrared, or just blue. So we have them all in one, and you're able to turn them on and off as like, so you can just have infrared, just red, just blue, or any combination of such. So as I mentioned, we have three of the different blue wavelengths, 3 reds and 2 infrareds, and also it's pure light. It doesn't produce any ionizing radiation, so nothing in the ultraviolet spectrum. So as Maurice alluded to, the blue light affects the skin and surface and lymph drainage. The red light penetrates about 1 centimeter, maybe 2 centimeters, depending on the output power of about 3/8 of an inch, or 3/4 of an inch. And the near-infrared penetrates up to 20 centimeters, which is about 8 inches. Now that's if it doesn't hit bone. It won't go through bone, that's through soft tissue. But that's still pretty impressive for working with, say, parasites in the gut, or some kind of an organ problem or organ trauma. Basically in physics, for a given wavelength, the greater the light intensity, the greater permeation of depth, which makes sense. So how did we get to choose which wavelengths went in? Well, it's 20 years of research on his, but interestingly enough, if we look at the wavelength, which is on the X, it's on the bottom, 600 starts off at the red. The blue is actually 440, that's not on here. That would be further to the left. It starts off as the red, and then as we climb into 800 and 900, we get into the near-infrared. Well, as we can see, if we go too much over 900, the water band will start absorbing. So, and the light therapy will not be administered to the tissues desired, especially if it's trying to go somewhere deep. So we stopped the infrared at 910, and you can see also, as we're towards the red, we start hitting the oxygenated and deoxygenated hemoglobin. So I know it's kind of a technical slide, but that's how we came to choose the red and the near-infrared. I'm not going to sit and just read off of these, but you can feel free to take a picture. There's lots of benefits of light therapy. There's over 2,000 published articles on PubMed, so it's irrefutable that any of these. Of specific importance is actually the last one, the production of nitric oxide. They found that it actually dumps the nitric oxide off of the deoxygenated hemoglobin, and that's what causes the vasodilation or increase in circulation, which you can see live within seconds if you have the infrared camera. So it's very objective as opposed to subjective.
How does the lymphatic drainage happen?
The lymphatic drainage, when you're stimulating with the blue light, you're actually stimulating the lymph node. In my practice, I go right over the actual lymph node to get it to drain. And that's hard because, as everybody knows, unlike the heart with the blood, the lymph doesn't have a pump on it. It's
Right.
only through mechanical action, getting people to move, right? Because the muscles are what stimulates that bulb to get to flow.
Right, and then the Indian Ayurvedic doctors kind of like dig in, but it really hurts to get it done correctly, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Okay, so for the mechanism of action, well, what we're in the realm of this therapy is photobiomodulation, and that's a really big word. So I noticed on Dr. Saputo's slides we just say PBM. So then for future photobiomodulation, modulating biology with photons, basically. Okay, so I'm going to have Dr. Saputo come up to talk about his slides and his experience with cognitive decline and brain disorders.
I'm a little different. I'm a clinician. And a lot of this stuff I don't really understand. I do what's called an outcome study. You try something on a patient and it works, and you do it again. It doesn't work, you don't. And a lot of this we don't have a final answer on. But we do have some literature that is, this will be posted on your website. So if people want to come and look at these slides and have the information, you can go to balesphotonics.com. It'll be there, and you can just peruse through the slides so you don't have to take notes. It'll all be there. Now, when I first got started with Maurice about 20 years ago, it was really a weird kind of thing. I was reading about what he was publishing in what I would call a throwaway medical magazine. It wasn't anything real technical. But it struck me that he said some things I thought, this is weird, it can't be true. And I was about to throw it into the circular file, and I noticed that it was a local number. Bad luck, Maurice. So I called him and I said, why do you do stuff like that? And he said, you sound like everybody else who does this kind of thing, and you're not really open-minded. He says, why don't you bring a couple of patients by my office? I'm not a doctor, I'm an electrical engineer, but I'll teach you by demonstration. So I brought one guy who was pretty sick. He had multiple sclerosis. He was in bed most of the day. He couldn't hold down a job. And he climbs up into the office all hunched over, and it was a miracle he even made it. And in about 20 minutes of treating him, the man has a smile on his face. Instead of being bent over, he's more straightforward up. And over the course, and that was about a 15-minute treatment. Over the course of the next few weeks, he went back to work full time. Now, he died of his MS, okay, so we can't say that we extended his life, or we don't know that, but the quality of his life was fantastic. At that point, he says, would you like to try and learn some more about how this light works and bring some more patients in? I said, okay, that's pretty convincing, I'll do that. So he says, well, I'm available on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays from 5 to 7 after you finish your work and after I finish my work, and we'll go ahead and treat a few patients. So we did that for 3 months. And at the end of that period, people were getting better. And he looks at me and he says, what do you think now, Mr. Smart Guy? He didn't use those words, but that's what his eyes said. Because he wouldn't say a thing like that, would you, Maurice? And so we started something in 1999 that we have continued for 20 years, and we've seen many iterations of what light does, and the machines that he has developed. And I've got a clue what he does, but I've seen his workshop. There are little tiny wires that go everywhere on these little chipboards. It's amazing to me that he even does it, because he doesn't even use glasses for some of it. It's micro technology. So if you opened up one of those machines, you wouldn't believe what's there. But you would believe, if you use it, what it does. And that's what I learned, and why I have been a devotee and very much looking at him as a mentor who has taught me how to use the light, and it's taken a lot to learn to do that. It's an experience that takes time and many iterations of machines, and they're all a little bit different. And it does some amazing things. Now, he and I have done some work with Gary Null. I don't know if you know who Gary is, but he's a pretty well-known person who has a radio station out of New York. He owns the station, and he's independently wealthy. He's got a center in Mineola, Texas, where we have been to, Martin and Maurice and I, several times. And we've done demonstrations for him on the light. And some of what's happened there has just been a shock to me, because I'll tell you a story. A 93-year-old man comes in with Alzheimer's, and he's got a shuffled gait. He's walking like this. There is no expression on his face. He's got a flat affect, and he's drooling a little. And you ask him a question, he looks a little bit, you know, there's something wrong with this guy. And his wife is there pleading, you have to do something. And Maurice had brought a new machine, which was the first iteration of the Firefly. We'd never used it before. And he said, go ahead and treat him, and he figured out which frequencies you wanted to use. And I treated him for about 20 minutes on his head. And when it was over, I fell off my chair, because I'd never seen anything like this before. The guy brightens up, he starts walking with a normal gait, and he says, you know, I used to be an electrical engineer. And he says, I feel like dancing. And I'm going, what was that? And the people that were watching it felt the same thing. And I looked at Maurice and said, what'd you do? And we've had a few people who have had neurological problems. MS, people with Alzheimer's disease, other people with it, and people with traumatic brain injuries and neuropathies. And not everybody responds like that, but a few do. I'd say 15% of the people that I have treated, you see a dramatic response in one treatment where the gait changes and they're more alert. They can start doing things like subtract 7 from 100 and get it right, whereas they didn't have a clue when they started. It's like a magic thing. Now, I'm not connected with Maurice financially in any way, and my only conflict of interest is that he provides me with machines, and I'm grateful for that, because I get to use those machines on my patients, and I do it all day long between myself and the people that work with me. And I get to watch these people get better who have all kinds of conditions, whether it's back pains with sciatica, if it's Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, or he's telling me ALS. I haven't treated anybody with ALS, but I believe him because he says things that I think are outrageous, and then we do it, and it works. When we went to Gary's place and we treated 3 people with MS, it blew my mind. We had 2 girls that were in their early 20s. One of them couldn't take one step after the other with her balance being all right. She was a cheerleader, and we put the light on her head. That was right after we treated the fellow who had the Alzheimer's, and she could stand like this for 45 seconds. It was like, is this for real? And the other girl we treated was an actress. She had a lot of neurological findings that were abnormal. She too, by the end of the week, was without symptoms. We treated a fellow who had MS that was 29 years old. He'd had it for 15 years, something like that, MS. And his eyes were nystagmus like this, and he couldn't see. And his arms were shaking, and his legs were shaking. And it was, when we were given the lecture at the beginning, I saw him in the wheelchair. I thought, Maurice, I don't want to treat that guy because I know we've got probably no chance of doing it. We treated him for about 20 minutes, and then the nystagmus cleared. There's just a little tiny bit left. And he couldn't put his hand to his face without it shaking all over the place. If he tried to eat, food would be flying every place. And that calmed down. He starts crying, and his mother starts crying, and said he hadn't been able to do that for 10 years. It's like, what have you done, Maurice? So I'm inspired, and I tell you that because I do this all the time with my patients. I see them making improvements that are incredible. So the stuff that we're talking about that has to do with the brain is a miraculous thing. And the machines he has developed go through the brain. They get through the skull. And you get deep effects from it. And we treat the eye directly with the infrared, not the blue or the red, because it's too strong for the eye. But we shine the light, the infrared, directly into the eyeball for a couple of minutes. And if you do the imaging, you see changes occurring in what you're doing on the skin. And I don't know what it means, but I know it's changing. And the big thing is it has an effect. It changes the neurology. We put it up their nose, like the people who do the V-light. You know, Lou Lim, a few years ago, we went to a conference in San Diego and learned about all the work that was done at Harvard and the Boston University and the Boston VA, and talked to Lou Lim about it and started buying the machines, I did, and having my patients use them, and they were getting better. And it worked, but it takes time. It took weeks for people to get better. With this technology, it doesn't take weeks. And it's not like they all respond. Of the 25 people I've treated who have Alzheimer's disease now, I'd say all but 5 of them have had responses that are noticeably impressive. So you see changes. And they're all not right now, but a lot of them are. And when you see those changes, it blows your mind. It blows the family's mind, and it blows the patient's mind. And they wake up, and you see their eyes moving around. There's somebody home. Oh yeah, I was supposed to show some slides. But the reality of this thing is it's not the science so much that interests me. I'm a doctor. I want people to get better. And I do what I can to make that happen. And so the technology is, for me, it's secondary. You two people figure out what to do. I'm the guy that holds the light and gets all the credit. I like that part. And it's so heartwarming to see people respond to the things that you do. For people with sciatica or bad necks, or people who have visual field defects because they've had a stroke, and you shine that light in their eye and they go, I can see. I've had a dozen people over the last 20 years who have been willing to let me put a light in their eye and see if it works. And it has. And it doesn't do it in everybody, but it does in a lot of them. I'd say 80% of the people who I've chosen to do it on have had some kind of effect. They're going, wow, that's amazing. Changes their life. Now, how do you work this thing? Like that.
Yeah.
So what kinds of conditions does it work in? Okay, when you're looking about the brain. So it's strokes and traumatic brain injuries for sure. The degenerative diseases like any kind of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, MS, and others. And the psychiatric disorders, I haven't done that too much in my own practice because they don't come to me for that, although we've used it on some. And we talk about getting penetration, okay, into the brain, Wow, it really goes up. Yeah, good. Okay, so the infrared is what really penetrates through, I think, the most. But you got to keep in mind that when you put the blue light on somebody, it only goes in 2 or 3 millimeters, and they say so it doesn't have an effect on the deeper tissues, but it does because you're treating the nerve endings, right? The receptor sites of those nerves that have axons or dendrites that are in the skin, and that goes back and treats the whole nerve. So you may not be treating the deep penetration, but you're treating the surface of the nerve, so it works. The near infrared goes pretty deep, and the amount of power that you use is what determines how effective this is going to be. Okay. So what happens when you shine a light on somebody who is a normal person? What kind of effects do you have? Well, if you do that to a normal person, you can do performance testing on them to see their cognitive function. And this has been done, and this is the reference for that. It improves a few points. If you put it on the right side of the forehead, but not the left, and God knows why I don't, but it helps with people who have depression to some extent. The other study showed that if you just put the light on your brain, and Maurice does this, maybe that's why you're so smart. I don't know. He does it every day. I have to try that. And it improves cerebral blood flow and vertebral blood flow by 25%. This is a QEEG, and it's somebody who had a traumatic brain injury. And this was done over a period of just a few minutes, and you can see that in the one on this side, there are not a lot. These are neural connections here that they measure doing this test. This is what happens to make neural connections better in somebody who's had a brain injury very, very quickly. I'm really good with this, huh? In Alzheimer's disease, there's studies that show in animals, nobody has donated their brain yet who has Alzheimer's disease. And it makes changes in the tangles and of the tau protein and the beta amyloid plaques, in oxidative stress, in mitochondrial ATP production, which is probably the biggest thing that this light does, is it can improve mitochondrial oxygen utilization and ATP production by up to 50%. So you're looking at the big defect that a lot of people have in almost any disease, because that's the final common denominator of every disease is decreased ATP production. So if you can improve that, you can do something to reverse that process, and you have to wait and see what it is. So that's really important. And there's something about brain rhythms that it also involves that we're not going to get into. Was that right? Yeah. Oh, why does this keep doing that? I have magic in my fingers, I guess. Well, we know that when you shine light in vitro, okay, of brain cells and of nerve cells, that it makes the damaged neurons regrow. It also restores melatonin production. It reduces the beta amyloid production and clears the tau proteins. This begins in hours after you put it in mice, and so that lots of poor mice have been sacrificed to find that out. And it decreases the oxidative stress. Figures.
So I have a question regarding the ATP production.
Yes.
Does it also have kind of sports implication, like the person having more energy and being able to like do exertion longer? It
It improves your ability to with more strength and endurance. There have been studies on that. We should have given that to our warriors, okay, as they had a self-destructing final. Yeah, it's very good for sports injuries, for tennis elbows and knee injuries and all kinds of problems like that. I don't know which button to push here, Mark.
Okay.
Just tell me which one to
Go
push
ahead,
here.
you want to do this slide?
Huh?
This is a new slide for you.
Okay, everybody knows this. This is a standard thing that we're all doing. The Bredesen protocol is really hot. It works. We know it works. It's really tough to do. It takes somebody who has a whole team behind them to be able to do this, but when they do, they get better, along with these other things that are just standard things to do. But now we're talking about light therapy, right? It's nice to see he screws it up too. Now with the next one. Oh, it's that one over there? Or you just push?
Yeah.
You better stay here.
Okay.
So the first two slides, one is a smaller magnification, the one next to it. These are studies of in vitro treatment with infrared light. The last two slides were done and in 5 days after treating them using very low levels of power. Look at the difference in what those cells look like. They go from not having much in the way of any axons and dendrites to looking like the connections they can make are tremendous. So we have some objective evidence that when you shine light out of the body anyway, as this is done, it makes a big difference. Now which button do I push? Oh, nice. This is a very interesting study that looks at how infrared light can change in mice who have Alzheimer's disease, okay, and it's done by giving them Alzheimer's disease, doing transgenic studies. And what they found is that you start to see changes in the improvement of the tangles and plaques in a matter of hours. And the next slide that I have here, it went by itself. It's magic. Shows normal rats that have this Alzheimer's change having this is what happens in their tau tangles here. They don't have it at the beginning at 3 months, at 6 months, and at 12 months they all develop these changes. And the same thing with the plaques that you can see in the bottom one. So this is the normal development of these mice in that setting. You keep pressing a different button every time. All right, this is an example of some sections they took of their neocortex and of a normal mouse that doesn't have any of this. This is the mice that had the transgenic changes after they have been, what their brains look like. And this is what you see after they have been treated with infrared light. So you can see that there's a big change from this to this. This is scientific data that's pathological, that shows the changes that you see. And you can look at the summary of it here. Using the silver stain that shows some of the abnormalities, this is what the damage is in the normal rat. This is in the transgenic rat. And this is after you've treated the transgenic rat with infrared light. And this shows the same thing in a different area. Why don't you just stay here? Okay, now this is another study that shows the same thing when you're looking at the tau tangles. This is the wild normal rat. This is the rat that has the transgenic changes. And this is after they've treated it with infrared light. So there's a big change in the amount of pathologies that you can see. And you can see how this is the normal, this is the one that's the abnormal one, and this is the one that's been treated. It looks almost like the normal one. So that's more evidence of that. Okay, and here's another one that looks at the same kind of thing when you're looking at different areas. And basically this is a different way of looking at either the percentage of change that there is or the total volume of change. You can just look at the bottom slide and see that there's always improvement in this when we use infrared light. So this is pathological evidence that, at least in mice, this is what happens. They did some studies of this at the Quiet Mind Institute, or Foundation, and these are the things that they found. That when they treat people who have the problems with Alzheimer's disease, that there's an increase in blood flow and in oxygenation. There's a removal of the toxic proteins that are there, the tangles and plaques. The Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or traumatic brain injuries are improving substantially. And when you look at some of the things that are changed, there's less anxiety and stress, the moods are better, their energy is better, they're more alert. The kind of things I was telling you that I saw in these people that we were treating ourselves. And a lot of the comments we hear from is, I have my husband or I have my wife back, thank you. This is amazing, I can't believe it. Okay, so our experience with this is that using the older devices that don't have a lot of power, they work, but it's slow and it takes time. There's nothing wrong with that. You can use a V-Light, you can buy it for $1,800, and most people who will use that light will get better over time. And so it's a good home device that could be used, but it's not anything like what we're seeing with the machine we have, because it's much more powerful, way more powerful. Again, I think the main thing we're doing is we're resuscitating the mitochondria as we shine that light on them, increasing ATP production, and doing something even more special because of Maurice's technology that he understands and I don't, but the outcome is very good. And there may be other mechanisms that we don't even know that this does, because what we need is a Light Institute to be able to do this. Just one more. So we've come a long way working together. Our initial devices had 1/4 of a watt, and now we're using 30 to 60 watts, maybe even a little bit more than that. Mark says 37 to 75 watts, which is 300 times of what we initially started with. And it doesn't mean that we didn't have some effect with that, because we did. I was very happy with it when we first started, and my MS patient, the first one I told you about that hobbled into my office, he was happy with it too. They're LEDs, they're not lasers. They're called cold lasers, but they're not lasers. So they're safe, and you can deliver a lot of power that way without burning tissue. And now Maurice told you about the last thing that we're doing with his new approach to things that I think is taking things to a whole new level. And I don't know of any of the lights that do that. So it's a privilege to work with you guys. And if it wasn't for that, I'd still be in the old mode of my practice, which has totally changed. I'm an internist by training. Have practiced internal medicine for a long time until I started doing functional medicine maybe 25 years ago. And now, 20 years ago, meeting Maurice and doing this largely as the biggest thing I do in my practice, with the exception of looking at people holistically, of which this is one aspect. Because I think that that's the real medicine, that's the deep medicine that looks at how people get sick. It's not just medicine that we use with drugs, it's not just functional medicine that tells us about the biochemistry and physiology. It's not just light, it's about looking at the whole person and then using these things as they should be applied to each person, because they're all different. Okay.
He needs a few lessons in turning the slides, but okay, where am I? So I'm going to go through some of this quickly. As he mentioned, we're going to get this posted up. This has some more research highlights, non-brain cognitive, more pain in that. But as I mentioned, there's over 2,000 published articles on PubMed, so there's an abundance of light therapy articles. Interesting enough, for MRSA, they were finding that with the blue light that was actually way less powerful than ours, with a combination of the methylene blue, they saw a 25-fold reduction for MRSA, which is pretty impressive. So there are going to be 2 articles which are printed, which are in your take-home packets. This was one of them. So they found that they could, this was actually done in Australia, published in January 2016, and they found it was, the near-infrared light was really good with conjunction with other treatments, and they thought that because of their outcomes, they warranted many more studies. So we're really excited. This was published in the journals Frontiers in Neuroscience, which is a pretty prestigious medical journal. There's another one that's also included that has over 40 references, and those are in your packets, so feel free to read. This goes back a couple of years, but NASA was commenting on photon light therapy as early as 2001 and finding that it increased the cell growth, and for the soldiers, decreased the healing time and healing of wounds. Like I said, these are going to be up, so these are in somewhat alphabetical order, everything from asthma, arthritis, bone repair, fibromyalgia, dental applications, or mucositis. I wanted to take a little time to do a nervous system review because I think it really helps dictate how we treat when we're treating for pain conditions. So just a little bit of review of the dermatones. One theory or way to treat is actually just to work on the dermatonal distribution with the light. Now, if one has the infrared camera, that gives a much better insight because you can see the feedback of what's going on. But if one doesn't have the camera, you can actually treat along the affected dermatome, because as Maurice mentioned, even with blue light, if you're just hitting the nerve endings, you are energizing the body. You're theoretically treating the whole body if you're just treating one point of it. And that goes back to my acupuncture Chinese medicine background, right? Put one needle in, theoretically, you're treating all over. So dermatomes, I recommend for practitioners and physicians that buy our equipment to have a dermatome chart in their office, because they can even show the patient what's going on and where things can be referred to. This was an interesting slide from a couple of years ago. We found out with the research for thermography found out that the peripheral doesn't follow the dermatones, it follows thermatones, and they're similar but a little bit different. And what the diagram on the right is trying to show is that the nerves that innervate, the left is the actual, we see T10, T11, T12, that's the actual vertebral level. Those are innervated by levels a couple above. So if someone were to come in with pain at T10, T11, T12, possibly they have a herniated disc, possibly it's a local injury. There will also be referred pain from 3 levels above, so it's always good to treat that area too. And if you have the infrared camera, you can see it, it comes right up. But if you don't, you're in a remote location or something, that's a good something to consider. Also for such as RSD or CRPS, this shows different regions, right? Chronic regional pain syndrome. So if someone has a whole region which is in pain or any kind of dysfunction, this is kind of a map that shows where to treat. So for upper, it'd be T1 through T2, the limbs, and so forth. So it's another paradigm to take into account when treating patients. Again, if you have the camera, it's very easy to see, but if you don't, you can follow this. I thought this was interesting. This is an image of a back. Those are actually the patient's kidneys, and this just shows with the fMRI the nerves and all the distributions coming off the spine. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple of case studies. I don't think we have all of these. These were used, so normal sympathetic function shows the symmetrical blood perfusion. It means if you draw a line down the midline of a patient, they should be symmetrical left and right. Any deviations from that show dysfunction or pain disorders. People with chronic pain always deviate from those patterns. We were using the thermography, the infrared camera, to monitor local area blood perfusion. What's nice is you can save an image on one side of the screen and then show progression. That's what we're going to show. That's actually what Dr. Squito is famous for in his practice, which is it's interesting for the patients to actually see what's going on. So it isn't so much that I feel better, but objectively they can see something's happening. I think it's very, very powerful. The original device was the photonic stimulator, but now called the Firefly, to regulate circulation. This was before just using infrared light. Now we're using infrared red and blue. We're really up-regulating cytochrome C oxidase, which is in the third part of the electron transport chain of the mitochondria. We won't go any deeper than that, but that's what the study shows is happening. And we're healing neurological condition. We can see that the patient's getting better by restoring that symmetry, right, the mirroring on the midline. So there's a few of these. Okay, diabetic neuropathy. So this is a series progression of someone in the upper left came in. That was pre and post treatment. You can see the windows are divided. You can see that the symmetry is way off. This is on the plantar surface of the feet. And post even the first treatment, it's still far from normal, but at least the symmetry is there. The second treatment, pre and post, there wasn't as much improvement that time. The last treatment, pre and post, this is over 4 days. You can see that it's not perfect, but they're starting to get this sympathetic tone back into their feet.
These changes occur in 10 minutes.
I should mention,
In 10 minutes.
Yeah, the treatment time is 10 minutes. Achilles tendonitis, it's pretty obvious where the injury was. 20% less pain after 10 minutes. And put it in the chronic because it had 18 months of unsuccessful treatment. So if it's over 6 months, it's a chronic condition. So this didn't just happen. For acute conditions, it's even quicker recovery. I like this. This was a patient who actually worked in the hospital. He wasn't a doctor. He was one of the, I think a nurse or a medical assistant. And we were imaging on the top. That's his thoracic and lumbar and sacral spine, so mid-lower back. And on the bottom is the plantar surface of his feet. And that was before, and then after 3 treatments, it even flared up a little bit more. But we were starting to get the tone back down on the plantar surface. And after 5 treatments, that's much more of a normal image. You can see it's symmetrical in his low back. Well, we didn't treat his feet. We just treated his low back. So it shows that the dermatome system works and that all of the distribution from here ending up here is now correct. That's a much better image. So it used to be called RSD, reflex sympathetic dystrophy, which is actually a lot better than chronic regional pain syndrome. Usually comes in 2 flavors. This was cold, the other one is hot. Cold is, in my opinion, harder to treat. It's usually more of a chronic progression. It starts off hot and then goes to cold. You can see how cold the patient's toes were. They were even cooler than the floor of the room. And then after 1 treatment, you can see the warm up.
This person was treated in the thoracic spine as we took these images. And in 5 minutes, we saw an RSD disappear.
And it was chronic RSD because it was in the cold state, which is the hardest. So there's many more case studies, but I think you kind of get the picture with it. I'm just going to go through a few slides that show our product line. We basically have 4 different models. We brought 2 of them today. The Clinic Pro, where you can have 2 wands, so you can get up to about 72 watts of output power because you're running 2 wands at once. The Clinic, which is half of the Clinic Pro, it's 1 wand. That's the first top machine we brought here. That can accept the frequencies and everything from a function generator, which is on top here. And then 2 home models. One that it's like the Clinic but can't accept any of the frequencies into it, and then the Home Mini, which we didn't bring, that's half the output power. So interesting to note, how many we sold between the Biophoton, the old one, and this, probably 50 home models, something around that. I've not had 1 returned or request for refund or anything, because our model is that they usually see a physician, such as Dr. Swift or a practitioner as me. They get a couple treatments at that office, and then if they want to buy one for home, they call. So it's not just somebody calling me cold, and we don't want to do business like that. As Maurice mentioned, there's 2 accessories: the infrared camera, which is over there, and then the F-scan. So if practitioner or physician wants to work with the frequencies, the F-scan is a must, think, because it really comes up and shows you and actually tells by name what the pathogens are. And to me, that's a big jump for these galvanic skin resistance machines from 20 years ago. And then the thermography camera used to take up about 6 boxes and used to take liquid nitrogen, and it's shrunk down to that little size there. And that's really important for working with pain conditions, I think, because you can see referred pain patterns. I have it happen not every week, at least once a month. Someone comes in, Doc, I have carpal tunnel. I image them. Their neck's on fire. They've been to every specialist. You can treat even with our Firefly the wrist in that area. You won't get them better. Problem is they have a impingement in the neck. You can see it with the camera right away. So we can make this so affordable. We don't have any stockholders. It's just Maurice and I that own the company. As Dr. Swift mentioned, he has no financial interest in it except for piloting and trying out our new machines. Maurice has spent 8,000 hours at least in his lab in Lafayette working on this. We have clinics doing work for us pro bono, and I want to mention I just received some results back from a clinic out of Detroit, Michigan. And I had set them up in January with the Clinic Pro model with the F-scan for treating mild dementia and those kind of patients. And we're going to send an email out later for those that are interested, opt into our email list. But the results look impressive. We were doing mini mental, mini clock drawn tests before and after a series of treatments. So I chose those metrics just because that's what's established by the establishment, right? I mean, we could show F-scan results, but then nobody really knows what an F-scan is. So more to come. We're probably going to do a study down at Dr. Keneally's center where I work with more patients. We had the chips custom designed for us. That's how we're able to do the multi-wavelength, multispectral. And we really honestly believe in getting this technology out. As Steve mentioned before, Dr. Spudo has people coming from all over the Bay Area, and the biggest complaint I get, and people buy a home, is the traffic is so darn bad to go over to Walnut Creek. So we really would like to have somebody in Marin, somebody on the peninsula, somebody in the South Bay, to get it out to more people. So to conclude, the future looks bright. You can use the Firefly with infrared imaging for there's both a monotherapy. I even combine it with my acupuncture with high and low intensity PEMF, pulse electromagnetic field. It works. It plays well with others. You can do it with other therapies. It doesn't have to be alone, or you can use it alone. You can monitor it with the infrared camera, and the I mentioned before, the F-scan is good for if you want to work with parasites and bugs. The infrared imaging is good for pain. It's a good reference. Many of the chronic pain conditions that have been difficult to manage, and we're trying to get into cognitive decline, we think now can effectively be treated. And we'll see what the data shows us for reversing cognitive decline, but so far it's looking pretty good. So at this time, we'll turn it over to questions. This is the boss of our company. That's the home mini. That's the mini cat of Marisa, and that's actually the biophoton wand part. I sold it to a physician in Thousand Oaks, and his girlfriend thought it would be cute to treat her dog who was having neck problems. So he sent me a picture. We don't have a veterinary model yet, but we will.
Actually, I've used it on a horse.
Okay.
Yeah, my wife has horses, and they're old. And this particular horse has a disc problem, and you could push on its back and it would collapse. If we use the photon, the old one, the old biophoton, for about 15 minutes, you could ride the horse.
So, okay, so questions for any of us, either of us?
What do you think the mechanism is for bone regrowth or bone restimulation, and what have you seen?
Okay, so the question was, what is the mechanism of action for bone regrowth or bone stimulation? I think you are stimulating the osteoblasts, and if I went back to that study, that's what I'd have to look. I didn't do that study, but I'd have to look. But I think that's what you're doing to actually create bone. Now, the PMF will do that as well. There's good documentation on that. But I always tell my patients, if you have an acidic environment, it's probably not going to work. And you have to have the right concrete, aka calcium, magnesium, all the minerals that are in the bone in your system to regrow. You can't just magically regrow bone or cartilage. So you have to make sure, I prefer through diet, having those all in the system.
But you have to treat an area, so how does that translate to more diffuse growth?
I'd have to take a look at that study, but you're right. Are you talking like post a fracture or a break, or just in
No,
general?
I'm talking more like osteoporosis.
Okay, I'd have to take a look. I don't treat osteoporosis. I don't know if Dr. Saputo does.
Her question is very good. I don't know if anybody's treating osteoporosis with this light, because you're right. You have to treat all the areas where the problem is.
I mean, that's why I was asking what the mechanism was.
I don't know. I think osteoblast stimulation is part of it, but it's the same thing. It's increased ATP production. It's increased circulation with nitric oxide release. It's lymphatic drainage that's increased. It's all those things combined somehow. I don't know if anybody specifically studied anything more than that.
I think that study was just on local. I used it for local area fractures,
Right.
and I think that's what that study was. I don't think it was so much on.
If somebody buys this model and brings it home, how much training is involved to actually have it be effective? Or is there, without enough training, a potential or risk for using it inappropriately?
Okay, so the question was, upon purchase, I think about home model is what you're going for. How much training is required, and what is the risk if used? These are incredibly easy to use for pain. We usually recommend following the protocol that the practitioner use because they're either coming to see me or a physician such as Dr. Saputo first and getting results. So we would show the patient or the caretaker how to repeat that protocol because that's what we got results with, right? That's why they want to do it at home. There's not much risk with these. Patients can have pacemakers. I'm thinking, unlike with my PMF, pacemakers are okay. Implanted medical devices, since it's light, it's not magnetic or electrical stimulation. Obviously, you just don't want to shine it right in the eye. We do provide safety glasses, and like our home users and their caretaker, even just wear the safety glasses because it is a bright light, it's not a laser. But other potential for misuse, if someone has numbness or a sensory deficit, like neuropathy, diabetic, or chemo or anything, and they treat themselves, they can actually burn themselves because they can't feel. So we tell patients to be very careful. One way, if they're treating their foot, they can treat their foot for a minute and then feel with their hand or wherever they don't have a sensory deficit how warm it's getting.
So you said that if all the ingredients are available, possibility that bone regeneration could occur is saying, has there been any literature that would show that cartilage regeneration has occurred?
I have to look. I think there probably is cartilage regeneration, but I would believe the same. You have to have the ingredients to restore. You can't just magically regrow.
Right.
Cartilage. You have to have the.
But once there was the ingredient available, then there has been cartilage regeneration. Because that's one of the hardest things to regenerate, obviously, right?
I would definitely suspect. So anytime, and remember working at the cellular level, that you're increasing the cytochrome C oxidase, which is increasing ATP synthase, you're going to promote a healing process diffused over the area.
Yeah, so stuff like knees and whatnot.
It takes a long time to regenerate cartilage.
Yeah.
And I don't use it much in my practice for the purpose of regenerating cartilage. But if it does regenerate and there is some weak data to show it, then so be it. That's the best I can answer.
Can you talk a little bit about macular and retinal issues?
Okay, I'm going to forward that to Dr. Saputo's had more with the eyes. So the question was, can we talk a little bit more about macular and retinal issues?
There's a lot of data that's in the mainstream literature that shows that you can use it for dry macular degeneration. I wouldn't recommend it for wet, even though people have done that, because what you don't want to do is increase nitric oxide and more exuding of fluid and bleeding. It works, I told you, in my practice for people who have had strokes and visual field defects. My personal experience is that is working. For iritis or uveitis, it works pretty well. For people who have Meibomian cysts, you can shine it, and usually in a couple of days they disappear, but I've only treated a couple. So this is something that's going to be used more and more by the ophthalmologist, but it's not in the mainstream yet, but it's all over the literature. Yeah.
So I had a macular hole, I had a vitrectomy, and I have a damaged eye. And so I have the way the eye closed, successful. But would that do something for breaking down scar tissue, for possibly?
No, I don't think it would break down scar tissue. I think if you have macular degeneration that's dry, you will, okay, but I'm just saying in general, if you have macular degeneration, you will slow down the process at which it develops, or you will increase their vision slightly. It's not a big thing. For macular holes, I've not seen any data. I don't see there would be any harm in doing it if that's the only problem you have. It'd be something to think about. But I wouldn't make any statements about whether or not it would work. Just on my own experience, and I haven't seen it in the literature.
What about dry eyes from Sjogren's?
I have no experience with it, and I haven't read anything about it. I don't know. Ann?
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm seeing cognitive patients, and some of my patients have seen you. One of my patients bought a device.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in I don't understand half of what's been said today.
I don't understand a lot of it either,
But anyway.
but I know how it works.
I'm curious about, you mentioned at one point that you see 15% of people get a really good response.
Initially,
Okay.
and
But-
at first or second treatment, yes.
So, of the cognitively impaired people that you treat, who have a good response, let's take those. What is the time course of their good response? In other words, they have a good response initially and then it deteriorates over a few weeks. And then what's the frequency of needed treatment?
You need to do it every day the rest of your life. So you need to buy a machine and do it. Okay? But think of it this way.
Okay.
Alzheimer's is a horrible disease. It's progressive. And the cost of treating people in an Alzheimer's facility is $8,000 to $10,000 a month. So you buy a machine. And almost all of my patients, save a couple, who we've had results on that are good, that's 20 of the 25, they're buying machines. And they don't bring them back, they're using them. And the responses I'm getting from the family members, I've got my husband back. And it's not like they're all perfect. They're not. And go ahead.
So would you say you have more success with mildly cognitively impaired people than advanced, or do you say equally across the board?
Across the board, it works pretty well. Even people who are close to comatose, they'll get better. They don't drive cars and, argue with you, but they get better. And there are changes that make a difference to the families and to them. People with mildly or moderately severe Alzheimer's, they come in, they've got the flat affect, they've got the shuffled gait, and there's not much home. The ones that you see the change in, the 15-20% that happen right now, is very impressive. They just brighten up, and you see the changes that they have. And it's not like some of the mild ones, it doesn't do much of anything. We had one that we treated with Marty that didn't do much of anything.
And Parkinson's?
Parkinson's, I've only treated a couple people, but seen some really impressive improvement. I haven't seen it cure the disease, but I've seen people come in I have one astrophysicist who came in who couldn't give lectures anymore. He was in a wheelchair, and in his first day, he came in a wheelchair and he shuffled his way out. So it was a big change. And he's brightened up. He's got affect that you can see a smile on his face. And he's back home. You know he's home, and he's giving lectures again. And I've had some that didn't do anything. But what are you going to do? You've got a disease like that. Try it. Do 6 or 8 or 10 treatments. You'll spend $1,000 or so on that. That's a bargain. God help you if it works. It's fantastic. Yeah, Kat?
So Lynn, have you experimented with different locations of the head that you're treating and correlated that with different types of dementia? And it strikes me that of the patients you're treating of hands and minds and near toes, we ought to be looking at their neurocon MRI scans
Sure.
and giving you notion of which parts of the brains are atrophied, which parts are edematous.
I'd love it.
We could probably get better traction
Yeah.
by correlating what we're seeing on the neurocon with the
Absolutely.
we treat on the head, right?
Yeah, we're in our infancy of doing this.
Right.
What I do is an outcome study.
Right.
All right, I hold the light on their head and do it in certain places. We usually treat, if they've had a stroke, the side of the stroke, because if you treat the other side, they don't get better. And the people who have Alzheimer's will go from side to side. One day this side, another day the other side. We image while we're doing it, but we don't know what the images mean yet. But we're collecting information so we can learn from it. We're in the infancy of what this means. We need a study where we do SPECT scans and neurocognitive tests before and after. And it takes a lot of money to do that, and we don't have it. So
Well, we do have on all of our patients that we're sending to you neuroquant scans
Yeah.
and MOCA testing and neuropsych testing. So
send some more.
we should.
And I have fun with them, and I'd love to see the results.
And what you mentioned, it looks like you're treating temporally. I mean, are you doing frontal too, or your FTDs, or are you?
When I treat somebody, I will treat the center of their head around the back. I'll do another run this way, another run to the side of their head. Then I'll treat their eye on that side with the infrared, only the infrared. Then I'll treat up the nose because there's an access to the brain through the nose. And then we treat the mouth, okay, thinking that maybe some of the plaque that's in there has got microbes that in the long term will do something. We don't know. So we're inventing these things, and people are getting better. We need to perfect it and to study it more, but that's where we are now. So that's a great question. Yeah.
I know that Bob Hedaya is
Yeah.
doing QEEGs and then trying to correlate
Sure.
the areas with regard to that. And he makes since patients shave their head, even the female patients.
Yeah, well,
But you're feeling, I mean, do you see any differential, like when you treat people with thicker hair, are they still getting a response?
the light goes right through the hair. It's like a hot knife and butter. It goes right through. That's not a problem. You don't have to shave the head.
So it doesn't have to heat up.
No, it doesn't.
It's not like heat.
No. The penetration with infrared is deep. And if you're using 60 watts, wow. Thank you.
Do people ever get headaches if you use that too much?
No. In fact, their headaches almost disappear in under 5 minutes. There are very few headaches that don't disappear in under 5 minutes. There are a few. Yeah, Mark?
I just wanted to say something. I've been using all of your devices for 20 years. I had an original camera, pour liquid nitrogen in.
Yeah, me too.
I've had the whole thing. I use them every day in my practice. I use muscle testing to find the problems and then I treat it. So the best story is my mother, who died at 94, at 84, she flew from Ohio to Florida to see her sister. My wife and I flew down there. I travel everywhere with the photon. Everywhere.
Me too.
She had a stroke right in front of me and went aphasic. And within less than a minute, she's collapsed on the floor, and now she's no longer aphasic. She's not talking. My 84-year-old mother was dying. There's no question. Now, my aunt was the Jewish woman president of the Catholic hospital down in Tampa. And I'll tell you that story in a second. I muscle tested. I was still using a surrogate, so I used my ex-wife as a surrogate. Found where the clot was, put the photon on her head, and in 10 minutes, she was back to full speech. She was normal. My 84-year-old Jewish mother pointed at the ceiling and said, I was there and I saw you do that to me.
Wow.
A day later, she tells my brother, the travel agent, that her left arm doesn't work. She didn't tell me because she didn't want to worry me. So it took me about 2 days to get her left arm back. I gave her the 240 watt, 200 milliwatt one, and then she had it at home. And I would talk to her every day, and my 84-year-old Jewish mother who smoked every day a pack of Pall Malls, never exercised. I would tell her, because she always had a stiff neck and saw the chiropractor all the time, I'd say, Mom, put it on your neck so your neck won't be, I didn't say carotid. I said, put it on your neck, and it beeped, and I would say, and when I didn't hear it beeping, it's like, Mom, you didn't turn it on, because we didn't have phones that you could see. And so I'd listen for the beep and be like, okay, Mom, put it on the other side of your neck. She never had a TIA for 10 years at all. The last 10 years of her life, she died of congestive heart failure. She still smoked. She didn't exercise. And it kept her alive for 10 years, and she still had her brain when she died. So
Well, another anecdotal side of that is that we can treat congestive heart failure with this because you can improve cardiac output. I've done that on a number of patients who have had a wonderful response.
Any effect on blood pressure?
They say it helps to lower blood pressure, but it doesn't seem practical to me. Yeah, Grace?
I used to work with an electronics engineer named Herschel Tuman who had a device for near infrared, and he said that he had difficulty with dark Asian hair.
What kind of difficulty?
Just getting the penetration into near infrared.
Well, he should use one of Maurice's machines. It goes right through. It's not even a
It
small
was
issue.
probably a different model. Yeah.
Definitely.
You talked about
Sure.
a percentage of, you have a good memory. A percentage of people with dementia doesn't help, a small percentage, and a large percentage it does. Are you seeing a profile in personality, lifestyle that might be making a difference in who it's more and less effective with?
The sample size is too small, and I'm not smart enough to see a differential of that. So it's going to take more time. We need a light medicine institute. And that's what we're going to do with all the money you make, Maurice.
that's good.
That's good. That's what he wants to do too.
And then another follow-up question that's both related and not. So, with Lyme disease and the co-infections being so rampant, also having a potential role in dementias, is this effective potentially? Can the European machine detect what if there's Lyme or co-infections?
In the
present?
patients I have been told have Lyme disease, I haven't seen anything. I have great hopes that that's possible. And Martin, have you treated anybody with Lyme that you've been able to help? I know you do
No.
this more than I do.
No, the Lyme, but what I am finding a lot with the F scanner is is a lot of gut issues, and it will pick up on those. It seems to be pretty sensitive to those, and then 10-minute treatment over the abdomen.
I treat Lyme all the time. There's a group called Lyme Less Live More. It's a Facebook group. I'm their medical consultant. I talk to Lyme people all the time online through some thing where you talk online. I don't know how you do it. But I treat Lyme every day, and I've had great results with it. Really good results. Neuropathy, all the things that people have. Lyme is pretty easy. But what I do also is I take the homeopathic remedies that test for them. I apply it topically wherever the weakness is, and then I drive it in with the photon.
I'm back. All right. Last time we went to Gary's, there was a family come that all of them had Lyme. The father, the mother, and 2 daughters. And that's why they came there. So anyway, one of the daughters, we had like 40 people we were treating. So one of the daughters came in and I scanned her with the F-scan, and she was definitely abnormal. Had a lot of peaks that shouldn't be there. And so I programmed it and treated her, and I was able to, in I think 3 days, get rid of all the peaks, and her whole demeanor, her everything changed. She could, before that she wasn't sleeping through the night. She had trouble getting up and headaches, and she had all of it went away. And the last day, her father came in and he said, "Could you do that for me?" But of course it was too late because they were leaving the next day. But and her sister, I scanned her sister. Her sister didn't have, was not symptomatic like the one I treated. So, but that's a low. I mean, we haven't treated very many people. I know it's like on the East Coast they say it's a real epidemic.
But where in the body are you treating for Lyme?
Well,
They have their cyclone, or you treat in the
I
head?
treat the stellate ganglia and these, the lymph nodes, and I, like I said, I do use the frequencies. And you know, if you treat the thoracic area of the spine, you treat the whole body. So that's really good for somebody that, and I would use the red light because of treating the blood too.
Grace, could you tell the story you told me about hay fever? Wasn't that your wife who had a hay fever?
You're thinking of somebody else, it wasn't me.
I treat it all the time. It works great. All you got to do is put the light over the sinuses and the nose and the eustachian tubes, and usually in a couple of days it clears up. I've had a lot of people coming in with eustachian blockage, and I put that light. I've probably put both lights now that I have the new one with 60 or 70 watts in there, and within a few minutes, oftentimes you see it clear. And if it doesn't, it may clear in the next few minutes afterwards. So it's a great way to treat hay fever. I have it myself. This year I used it on my own face and ears, and it knocked it out. That's anecdotal evidence, okay? That's what I noticed. And a few of my patients have noticed.
Have you guys had any results with tinnitus?
Yes, it's amazing. And I would say in about half to 60% of the patients that have tinnitus, we've had a resolution of it. I think a lot of it comes from people who have cervical disc disease and have a lot of pain in the back of their neck and tightness around here. They often have TMJ with it as well. And that's you can get rid of a TMJ in 3 minutes. Unless it's a real severe one, then you can't. No matter what you do, it's not going to get better. But 90% of the people who have TMJ, you hold that thing in there for a couple of minutes and do it on one side of the jaw. And you say, open and close your mouth, and they go, oh, wow, that's amazing. Do the other side, please. And the tinnitus over several treatments often clears. So it's not everybody.
one other question. Is there any relationship between this technology and radionics, and scalar wave technology?
Probably, but I don't know what it is. Do you know where?
No, this is pure light with frequencies in it. But
Ever see anybody with this disembarkment syndrome?
What is it?
It's a kind of like a multiple disembarkment syndrome where they feel like they're rocking coming off a boat. It's an actual neurological syndrome.
No, I haven't. Have you, Martin?
No.
Nope. Sorry. If I get one, I'll let you know. You could try it. I don't know.
I've been using frequency-specific microcurrent in my practice for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And so my question is, do we know the effectiveness of treating with light frequencies versus electromagnetic frequencies? Do we know anything about the relative comparison effectiveness between the two?
What I can say is that anytime that you have a magnetic field, you have an electric field E cross B, and so by us using these frequencies, we're both doing magnetic treatment and light treatment, photons, electrons, movement, and magnetic fields. We're doing them all. I think Martin was talking about the PEMF pulse magnetic field. The pulse magnetic field works in a lot of things. It's really hard. Everybody's different. Dr. Sabuto uses it, and maybe the light works for some people better for a particular condition than the pulse magnetic field, but both of them work great. The thing I like better about the light is the pulse magnetic field is a huge magnetic field, and you're treating the whole body with it at one time, basically. And I mean, you agree with that? And so, I've never really tried that and looked with a thermal imager. I don't know what would happen, but you can't just direct it at an area nearly as good as you can the light.
I've looked, it doesn't change it much. When you're doing thermal imaging and you're using a magnetic PEMF, I don't think it does much of anything. It may heat it up, actually, so you see the effects of heat.
Have you had any experience with treating peripheral neuropathy?
Oh yeah, peripheral neuropathy is a slam dunk, particularly if you have diabetes. Those images that Martin showed you were...
I don't.
You don't have it?
It's caused from chemical exposures.
Okay. It's worth it. Well, it works in every kind of neuropathy.
Yeah, terrible.
It works better in diabetes than it does in chemotherapy-induced neuropathy, or certain other kinds of, alcoholic neuropathy is wonderful. People with poisoning, it's worth a try. People have been poisoned by some of the drugs. It doesn't work very well. So you have Cipro-induced neuropathy, you're in deep pucky. I've never seen that work.
I think that's what I have. I'm about 90% sure.
That's a tough one. I've treated a few people like that with no success, but if we didn't have the new machine that's got all these watts, so it's worth a try.
The reason I say that is a couple of months after I had a bout of pneumonia, I wasn't very sick. I took Cipro for 5 days, and a couple of months later I had these big painful knots in both my
It's terrible.
Luckily I didn't blow them out.
It's terrible.
But then I got the neuropathy. So,
I treated one person with a statin-induced neuropathy, didn't do anything. But then again, it was the old machine, so it's always worth a try.
Doesn't hurt to ask.
Well,
try.
yeah, well, come in and try it one time and see what happens. Usually we see a result in one treatment, at least a thermal change, and if I do, I'll be honest with you about whether or not I think you should do more of it. If I don't think it's worth it, I'll tell you. The worst thing we do is treat somebody for 10 days, get their money from them, and then it doesn't work. And then you got to face them and go, "Well, I'm sorry." Yeah.
Experience with parasites?
No, I've had no experience with parasites, but you have, haven't you, Martin?
So I'm just starting to do it at the center. Of course, using the F-scan first, and but it's just anecdotal. I don't have stool samples to show things are coming out, or pictures or anything like else that my patients love to show me. But that's been coming in the pike.
Many autistic children have parasites,
Yeah.
and the parents are masters and mistresses of looking at stool. So I think that whole community is going to be really excited about this once the word gets
Should
out.
run a study.
Any success with apnea?
I have not treated anybody with it. No, nor is ultrasound.
I have repeatedly, and it works.
Wow, what do you do?
Oh, real simple. With what depends on the person. So my brother, good example, vegetarian. His wife was 3HO, so everything white, no dust, no nothing, eat perfect. And he's my height, and he weighs 140 pounds. Never smoked, never drank. Sleep apnea. Went to UCLA sleep clinic. Struggling, CPAP, the whole thing. You find the remedies that'll work. So you're having to treat muscle test. Usually it's going to be throat and it's going to be chest. It's going to be esophagus. And so you find the remedies. There'll be a scar remedy, neurological remedy, something for drainage, something for the lymph system. You put it in a base of a homeopathic ointment. You put it on and then you laser through it. So you have to. So if it would be you, I'm assuming, right? All right. So we know you're overweight. We know your lymph chain is really engorged. So we're going to put you on lymph remedies for a lot. We're going to make you lose weight. We're going to make you drain all this stuff. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude. Just me. We're going to make you lose weight. My brother, imagine him, 5'10", weighs 140 pounds. Why would he have sleep apnea? Because, quote unquote, it goes more with overweight people, right? Well, the other thing I did is I made him give up all carbs because they're vegetarian, but they're my favorite kind of vegetarian that I hate, which is carb and cheesetarian, which is just fucked. So you should never eat carbs and you should never eat cheese. So I made him give it up. Then put the lymph drainage remedies in here, lasered it through, and cleared it out. So you had a lot of drainage.
Laser?
Yeah, you take the remedies, put them topically, and laser, put the photon on it, and drain all that stuff out of there. They talked about draining for hay fever. You can drain all this stuff out of there. You'll lose all this under there. It'll take some time because you're overweight.
So he doesn't need the CPAP machine
He
anymore.
doesn't need any of that anymore. And he was struggling to sleep, and he was screaming in his sleep. He would be asleep and screaming because he was struggling for air. And his wife was like, he was thrashing around. You don't get better than vegetarian, perfect house. Take your shoes off. I mean, you want to talk about a clean environment? It was clean. So they had no chemical toxicity at all. But he loved carbs and cheese. I said, you gotta give it up.
So you're using the light to drive in topical treatments?
I do it all the time. I drive things every day. That's what I do. And then you just find the remedy that'll work. So when somebody asked about something, I don't remember what it was, the neuropathy, the guy that asked neuropathy, I'd find the neuropathy point, I'd find out where it is, I'd put the remedies on those there, so it'd probably come from lumbar spine, put the remedies on there, and photon right through it. And it's better if you have a camera, because then you can see it real time, right?
I have a question for the science people.
Oh, okay.
And it's a question about the power that you're using, because it's very high.
Yeah.
And my understanding from what I've read about light therapies is that too little power doesn't have an effect, but too much power also doesn't have an effect. And that there is some window of optimal power. How did you arrive at the power you using?
Trial and error.
It was trial and error over the past 20 years, and I would agree with you that there's a sweet spot, a window. There, it seems that though that you can vary your treatment, your joules, using a time constant. So, for example, have a high output power, but only treat for 30 seconds or 1 minute. Now, if you have the infrared camera, you can watch and see the body's changes, so you'll know exactly when you've accomplished what you want.
If a person has fibromyalgia, you have to go slow because they're toxic, and that's a disease that isn't a disease. I mean, it's a whole bunch of things. The person's in bad shape, and so you have to go slow, and you have to change the lifestyle. A lot of good water, exercise, and then you have a chance to help them with the light. If you just go full blast with this light, you're going to make them really miserable. So that's the only one that I know that we have trouble with. Lynn?
If you do it slowly, it works just great in fibromyalgia. You don't want to have them treat their jaw and then treat their neck and then treat their low back and then treat their feet, because a lot of those people will flare. In the middle of the night, they'll call you and say, "You're the worst doctor I've ever seen." I had 2 patients when I was first starting out. I thought, man, this light's phenomenal. I can treat their neck and then their back and all that. Never again. So the people who have fibromyalgia, you got to go slow. Do one area at a time. And then do all your functional medicine too, because there's a lot involved. It's a very complicated disease. It has lots of things. Well, you know it all. Your functional medicine doctors.
So while we're asking about the frequencies, and how about, so now you have a home model that's not as powerful as the office model. And say, I mean, from my perspective, working with the cognitive patients, would it be better if cost was not an object for them to have a more powerful model?
Well, cost is always an object, yeah.
You know, understand, I mean, you want to move the needle, right? So, you know, move the whole model, move, you know.
Well, first of all, every person who gets a machine and buys it from Voorhees through our office, I train. And I know they know what they're doing. So they're trained properly. He's itching.
I'm back. To answer your question, this fellow, he asked me, see, we came out with the Mini, which has a 12-element array that has less power. And then for all the people that have cognitive issues, he said, no, we're not going to do that. We want the powerful machine. So what we did is the home model, we have 2 home models. The second home model has the same wand, the same power that the professional model has. Its professional model has inputs from frequency generators and stuff that the home model doesn't have. But actually, both of them are up here, and you can look; they're almost identical in looking.
What's the name of the home one that's the more powerful?
Home.
It's a
Home Mini is
home and home mini.
Oh, thanks. Marty?
Sort of personal to that, and knowing that you're at the beginning is, why do you treat one side one day and the other side the next day instead of treating the whole brain?
Because it works better, I think, that way. The people from Harvard and from Toronto, that'd be like people, Lou Lim, that's what they found. And we believe them, and so we're just doing what they said. It's that simple.
So you didn't have any adverse effects treating the whole brain?
Well, you might get adverse effects if you have somebody who has a traumatic brain injury, subdural hematoma, or subarachnoid hemorrhage, or some kind of just trauma, and you treat the other side of the head. It may get worse. So you want it, or a stroke, you want to treat the side that has the injury because you get a better response. It's, I don't know why. Okay.
That's 5 seconds.
What's the cost of machines?
So they range for the home model, it goes for $8,000, and go up to packages including the infrared camera and the F-scan up to $40,000. So there's a lot of different combinations, different models with different the accessories in that. The home mini, which we don't sell for home use for cognitive decline, but home use for pain or that, is $5,000. Okay?
Bravo.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. If any of you are interested in, potentially purchasing this or using this in your clinic, just, get in touch with me. I can give you all the pricing, and we can, have more conversations with these guys if you need more information. we really like to see somebody in Marin step up and start using this. We have people that like to see a practitioner. So thank you.